"I will marry you," said the Earl of Wraycliff, "but I will never touch you." He said it the way other men mentioned that the low road floods past Michaelmas, a fact offered early, so that nobody need be disappointed later. Clemency Wren sat on the other side of his desk, with her hands folded in her lap, and her father's debts folded rather more neatly in her reticule, and she did not flinch, because flinching was a luxury for women who had somewhere else to be. She was 29. She had spent most of those years being spoken past, not cruelly. That was the thing about it. Nobody in Harrow Cross had ever been cruel to Clemency Wren. They had simply developed the habit of finishing with her before she had finished speaking. The way you set down a cup you have not quite emptied. She was the apothecary's daughter, and then she was the apothecary's grieving daughter, and then she was the apothecary's unmarried daughter, which in that county was a kind of weather people mentioned and did not discuss. The Earl was 34, and looked as though the cold had got into him and stayed. Black coat, no rings, a face that gave you nothing at all and made you feel unreasonable for having wanted something. There were men in the county who had known him 15 years and could not have told you the colour of his eyes. They were grey. She had noticed inside a minute, because noticing was the only thing she owned outright. "You should ask me why," he said. "I assumed you would tell me if you wished me to know." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile would have gone, if he had still kept any. "My grandmother's settlement," he said. "The Wraycliff Trust pays for the sea wall, the low cottages, the school, and the doctor's fee for every tenant on this land. It is not mine. It is held for me. If I am unmarried on the 5th Michaelmas after my wife's death, it passes entire to my cousin Crispin Vane, who would have the school sold before the leaves were down." He turned a paper an inch to the left, as though the conversation had disarranged it. "That Michaelmas is in 9 days, and you have left it until 9 days. I have left it 5 winters. The wind came off the sea and leaned on the window, and neither of them looked at it." "Then these are my terms," he said. "You will be Countess of Wraycliff in every way the law understands. You will have the name, the house, the income, and my protection for as long as I am alive. Your brother's fees at school will be paid to the end. Your father's creditors will be settled by Friday and will never write to you again." He paused. "You will not have me, not my company beyond what the parish expects, not my confidence, and not my hand, ever. Do you understand what I am saying to you?" "You are saying," Clemency said, "that you would like a wife the way a house would like a roof." "Yes." "Then I ought to tell you something, my lord, so that you are not disappointed later either." She stood, and she straightened her cuffs, and she looked at him quite steadily, which almost nobody did. "I have been overlooked by experts. You will find you are not even the most thorough." And she said yes. She said yes for Gideon, who was 14 and clever, and 3 terms in arrears. She said yes for a dead man's ledger, with her own name on the wrong side of it. She told herself, walking out through that cold, beautiful hall, that she had made a bargain with her eyes open, and that she wanted nothing from him at all. She was going to be so wrong about that. The county learned of it at the Hart and Hollow, which was the posting inn at Harrow Cross, and the fastest road in Harrowmere, for anything that was not a horse. Clemency was standing not 4 feet away when she heard it, waiting for the Thursday carrier with a basket of dried mullein on her arm. "The apothecary's girl," said a lady in a very good bonnet, to another lady in a slightly better one. "Wraycliff. Can you imagine? Well, he cannot be looking for conversation." "He is not looking for anything," said the second. "That is rather the point of her, I should think." Neither of them lowered her voice. That was the part Clemency turned over afterwards, walking home with the basket cutting a line into her arm. They had not troubled to whisper. You whisper about a woman who might turn round. She did not turn round. She stood there and let it go over her like rain off a slate, and she thought, quite calmly, that she had heard worse said about her father's remedies, and half of those had worked. Here is what the county did not know about the apothecary's daughter, because the county had never asked. She could set a bone, She had kept her father's books for 9 years and could tell you to the shilling what a parish spent on laudanum in a bad winter. She read Latin badly and Dutch surprisingly well, and she had once corrected a physician from York about a dosage in front of his own patient and been proved right by Tuesday. She knew which fields flooded and why. She knew that her mother's people had kept bees at Ling Farm for 4 generations, and that a swarm will not settle for a frightened hand. She knew, most of all, how to be in a room without asking anything of it. It is a skill. It is not the same as being invisible, though it looks identical from outside, and the difference is that the woman doing it can see every single person in the room perfectly well. They were married on the Tuesday in the small church below Wraycliff, with 6 people present and the sea audible through the door. He put the ring on her finger without once letting his skin meet hers, which is harder than it sounds, and told her he had practiced. The Earl handed her into the carriage using the doorframe rather than her elbow. "My lady," he said. "My lord." 4 miles, and he did not speak again. The house stood on the cliff above the water with its back to the weather, 3 stories of grey stone gone silver with salt, and it was the most beautiful thing Clemency had ever been frightened of. Below it, the land ran down in a long green shoulder to the beck, and along the beck stood 11 cottages, and beyond them, the sea wall, and beyond that, the North Sea doing what it liked. From the carriage, she counted the chimneys of the cottages, and found smoke coming from every one. Then she looked up at the great house and found smoke coming from 2. She learned why within the hour, and she learned it from Mrs. Ilsley, the housekeeper, a small, upright woman of 60, with a bunch of keys and a face like a locked drawer. "His lordship does not have fires laid in the west rooms, my lady, because of the cost." Mrs. Ilsley's eyes went somewhere over Clemency's left shoulder. "No, my lady." "Because of the chimneys?" "No, my lady." "Mrs. Ilsley," said Clemency pleasantly, "we are going to be in this house together for a very long time. You may as well decide now whether you are going to answer me." There was a pause of exactly the right length, and then something in the housekeeper's shoulders came down 1/2 an inch, and Clemency understood that she had passed a test she had not been told about. They were her rooms. Mrs. Ilsley said, "The late Countess. Her ladyship liked the west side because of the light. When she died, his lordship gave orders, and they have not been altered since." "How long?" "5 winters, my lady. 5 winters of unlit fires." Clemency put that away where she put everything, in the place her father used to call the second shelf, and she said only, "Then we shall leave them, as they are for the present." And Mrs. Ilsley, who had been braced for something, blinked. Her own rooms were on the east side, warm, aired, freshly hung, and prepared with a thoroughness that told her they had been got ready in about 4 days by people who had been given very exact instructions. There was ink and paper and a good lamp. There was a shelf of books chosen by somebody who had guessed at her and guessed better than anyone had guessed in years. And there was a door in the east wall. It was a handsome door, panelled, painted the same soft green as the room. It stood between her bedchamber and his, and set into it, on his side, was a bolt. She heard it go home that first night at 10 minutes past 11. It was not slammed. That would have been something. A slammed bolt is a sentence with feeling in it. This one was drawn slowly, with care, the way a man does a thing he has decided he is going to do every night for the rest of his life. Clemency Wren, Countess of Wraycliff, lay in the dark in a house with 2 fires in it and listened to her husband lock himself away from her, 4 inches of green paint distant. Then she got up and went to the window and looked out at the moon on the sea. And on the slope below, in a long straight row against the wall of the kitchen garden, she saw them. 8 white shapes, low and square, standing in the grass like small abandoned houses. Beehives, every one of them silent. Nobody actually gave her the rules. That was the elegance of the thing. She was left to find them by walking into them, the way you find furniture in an unfamiliar room at night. Breakfast was at 8, and he took his at 7. Dinner was at 6, and it was served at a table 30 feet long, with the Earl at one end and the Countess at the other, and enough silver between them to have paid off her father twice. He was unfailingly courteous. He asked whether she had everything she required. He remarked on the weather with the competence of a man who had learned that weather is the safest of all subjects, because nobody has feelings about it. He never once asked her a question that could not be answered in under 6 words. He rode out at 7:30 every morning and came back wet. He worked in the library until 1. On Sundays they sat in the Wraycliff pew with 1.5 feet of cold oak between their sleeves, and the whole parish arranged itself behind them and watched the back of her neck. And he never touched her. Not a hand at a door, not fingers when a book changed owners. He had made a study of it, and the study was flawless, and after 12 days of it, Clemency understood something that she suspected he did not know he was telling her. A man who has stopped caring does not need to be careful. Careful is expensive. Careful takes attention. To go a fortnight without once brushing the sleeve of a woman who lives in your house, sits at your table, and walks beside you into church, a man must know precisely where she is at every moment of the day. She thought about that a good deal in the room with the green door. On the 12th morning she went down to the morning room, which faced east and was full of pale gold light and freezing cold, and she asked a housemaid for kindling. The girl looked at her the way you look at somebody who has asked for a knife. "I shall want a fire in here every morning," said Clemency. "Yours is not the hand that lights it, so nobody can be blamed. Mine is." She laid it herself, badly, and then rather better, and by 9 o'clock the room smelled of wood smoke for the first time in 5 winters, and Mrs. Ilsley stood in the doorway with her keys in both hands and said nothing at all. At 9:15 the Earl of Wraycliff came in, still wet from the cliff path, and stopped. He looked at the fire for a long moment, long enough for Clemency to count her own heartbeats and find them disappointingly quick. "You have lit the morning room," he said. "I have. I did not ask you to." "No," she agreed. "You asked me to be a countess. I have been reading about it. Apparently we are permitted fire." The silence went on so long she thought she had lost. Then he crossed the room and stood with his back to the flames and held out his hands to the heat as though they belonged to somebody else, and he was warming them on that person's behalf. "It is your house," he said at last. "It is not," said Clemency, "but it is my morning room, and I intend to be warm in it." He left without another word, but the next morning the coal scuttle by that hearth had been filled, and nobody in the house would tell her who had ordered it done. The county came to look at her, as the county will. They came on Thursdays with cards and appetites, and they sat in the drawing room and asked her about London, which she had never seen, and about her people, which was the actual question. And Clemency answered every one of them without once apologizing for herself, which they found unsettling. "An apothecary," said Mrs. Hallows, the vicar's wife, in a tone of gentle discovery, as though she had come across a bird's nest in a hat. "Well, what a useful sort of upbringing." "It was," said Clemency. "Your husband's chest is bad in November, is it not? He should not be preaching in an unheated vestry. Tell him to keep a shawl there and not to be proud about it." Mrs. Hallows had been intending to be sorry for her for at least another 20 minutes and had to abandon the whole plan. But the county's verdict was made and delivered before the tea was cold, and Clemency heard it as she showed them out, because people who have decided a woman is furniture do not lower their voices in front of her. "9 days, said one. "He chose her in 9 days. That tells you what she is for." "She is for Michaelmas," said another, "and Michaelmas is past." She stood in the doorway with her hand on the cold brass, and she watched the carriages go down the drive, and the thing she felt was not shame. She had expected shame. What arrived instead was much older and much more useful, and it had been arriving all her life, and it was this. Very well then, watch. It was the croup that changed the tenants. Ned Bly was 19 and worked the Wraycliff stables, and had a sister of 4 with a cough like a saw going through wet wood. And at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, his mother came up to the great house, because the doctor was 11 miles off, at Harrow Cross, and the low road, was under water. They fetched the housekeeper. The housekeeper, after 1 second of visible internal argument, fetched the countess. Clemency came down in a shawl over her nightgown, with her hair in a plait, and she did not ask a single unnecessary question. She had steam going in the Bly's cottage within the half-hour, a bowl and a blanket and her own hands holding the child over it, and she talked the whole time, quietly, in a voice that expected to be listened to, about nothing whatsoever, about the cat on the wall, about the price of ribbon, about how her brother Gideon had once been sick like this and had grown so tall since that he could not get through a door without ducking. The child breathed. By 4 she was asleep against her mother with her fists uncurled. Clemency walked back up the hill at 5 with her boots ruined and her hem grey to the knee. The Earl was standing at the door of the house. He must have been there some time. He had a lamp and his coat was on over his shirt, and he did not ask her where she had been, which meant he knew. "You went alone," he said. "I went with Mrs. Bly, who has the disadvantage of loving the patient. Wraycliff has a physician on retainer." "Wraycliff has a physician 11 miles away behind a flooded road," said Clemency, "which is a subject I should like to discuss with you when I have had 4 hours' sleep, and you have had the good grace to be shocked about it." He looked at her. The lamp put all the shadow on one side of his face, and she genuinely could not tell what was happening on the other. Then he stood aside from the door, and as she passed him, she felt him move. Not away, not exactly. A small, precise adjustment of the shoulders that a person makes when they have decided, in the space of half a second, not to put out a hand. She lay awake till the gulls started, thinking about that half second. She asked about the hives on a Sunday, coming back from church, because Sunday was the only day he could not walk faster than her without the parish seeing him do it. "There are 8 beehives on the kitchen garden slope." "There are. They are empty." "They are. For how long?" The gulls went over. He put his hands behind his back. "Since the winter my wife died," said the Earl of Wraycliff, and lengthened his stride after all. Parish or no parish. She got the rest of it out of Mrs. Ilsley that evening, over the linen count. In the flat voice the housekeeper used for things she had been told not to say and had decided were not covered by any reasonable interpretation of the order. The late Countess had kept them herself. 8 hives, her own veil, her own smoker, and honey, enough for the whole low row of cottages every autumn. She had died in the January. And in that house, in those weeks, no one had done the one thing that everybody in Harrowmere knows you must do. "Nobody told the bees," said Mrs. Ilsley. Clemency's hands went still on the linen. "It is an old custom, and a foolish one, if you like. And every woman in that county over 50 believed it absolutely. When a death comes to a house, somebody must go out to the hives and knock and say it aloud. The mistress is dead. Say it plainly, with her name in it. Otherwise the bees take it as a slight, and they sicken, or they swarm, or they simply stop, and you have honey no more." "Who ought to have gone?" Clemency asked. "His lordship. It was hers, so it should have been his." Cook asked him. I asked him. Mrs. Ilsley folded a pillowcase with unnecessary force. He stood at that window and he looked down at them, and he said, "No, just that." And by the March, they were gone, every one, and he has not once walked past the kitchen garden since. He goes the long way round by the stable yard. 5 winters, my lady, in his own garden, the long way round. That night Clemency stood at her window a long while with the moon on the sea and the 8 white boxes standing in the grass below her like small houses with nobody in them. He would not say it aloud, she thought, not once, not even to insects, and that was the first moment she understood that she had not married a cold man at all. She had married a man standing very still in the middle of something, the way you stand still in deep water, in the hope that it will not notice you and close over your head. She began, without asking anybody's permission, to be useful. The library at Wraycliff had a smaller room off it that nobody used, full of estate plans in long drawers, and Clemency Wren, who had kept an apothecary's books for 9 years, went through them the way other women go through a wardrobe. She found the tenancy schedule, She found the school accounts. She found the map of the beck and the sea wall and the thing beyond the sea wall that she had been looking at from her window for a month without knowing what it was called. The sea gate. It was a hatch in the wall where the beck ran out to the sea, and it worked on the tide. Shut when the water came in, open when the water went out. 11 cottages stood below the line of it, and a spring tide behind an east wind would put the whole low row under 6 feet of water in an hour if that hatch could not be opened. There was an engineer's report. It was 4 years old, and it used the phrase, timbers, wholly perished in a way that made Clemency put down her tea. And clipped to it, there was a bill, receipted, for £180 for the replacement of the said gate, paid in full 2 summers ago. She went down to the sea wall that afternoon, in a wind that took her bonnet twice, and she climbed the steps, and she looked at the gate. Nobody had touched it in years. The wood was green and soft, and she put her thumb into it up to the nail. She stood there for a long moment with the water going out below her, and then she went back up the hill to find her husband. He was in the library. She put the report on his desk and the receipted bill on top of the report, and she said, "Somebody has been paid £180 for a gate that does not exist." The Earl did not touch the papers. He read them where they lay, and she watched the stillness come over him. And it was not the stillness of a man being told something. It was the stillness of a man remembering something he had signed without reading. "Who countersigned this?" she said. "I did." "Who brought it to you?" A pause. "My cousin was managing the estate that summer." "Then your cousin is a thief." "My cousin," said the Earl, very evenly, "is my heir, and the son of the only person in my family who was kind to me. And you have been in this house 6 weeks. It landed exactly where he had aimed it." Clemency felt it go in, and she stood in front of that desk with her hands quiet at her sides, and did not let one thing show on her face, because she had 30 years of practice. "Very well," she said. "Then I shall be plain, and you may do as you like with it. There are 11 cottages below that wall. There are, at last count, 31 people in them, 9 of whom are under 12. There will be a spring tide on the 4th of next month, and if it comes in on an east wind and that hatch will not lift, you will not have a bad night, my lord. You will have a churchyard. That is enough. It is not remotely enough, but it is all I have, so I have said it." She turned to go. She was at the door when he spoke, and his voice had changed, and that was worse. "Lady Wraycliff, my lord, you have been in my house 6 weeks, and you have lit fires in it, and doctored a child in it, and read 4 years of my papers, and told me to my face that I have been robbed. A breath. Why?" Clemency stood with her hand on the door and did not turn round, because there are questions you cannot answer while a man is looking at you. "Because I have been in a great many rooms," she said, "where nobody expected anything of me, and I find I do not care to live in another." She went out. She did not slam it, and behind her, in the cold library, the Earl of Wraycliff sat for a long time with a receipted bill in front of him and did not read a word of it. The wind got up on the Thursday and did not lie down again for 3 days, and on the second night, Clemency woke at 1 in the morning and heard him moving. Not pacing, worse than pacing, the small sounds of a man sitting down and standing up again in a room he cannot get out of. She lay and listened for 20 minutes. Then she got out of bed and put her shawl round her shoulders and went and sat on the floor with her back against the green door and knocked twice on the panel with one knuckle. Everything on the other side stopped. "You are awake," she said, to the paint. A long, long silence. "Yes. Are you ill?" "No." "Then I am going to talk to you," said Clemency, "and you may listen or not, and you are entirely safe, because there is a bolt." She felt, rather than heard, him sit down on the other side of it, a shift in the boards. He was there, 4 inches away, with 1.5 inches of good oak between them. She talked about her father. She had not meant to. She talked about the shop at Harrow Cross, with the green glass in the window, and how he would fall asleep over the ledger and she would take the pen out of his hand, and how, when he died, she found he had been forgiving people's bills for the better part of a decade and writing them down as paid. She talked about Gideon, who wrote her a letter every fortnight that was 3/4 requests for money and 1/4 a boy in a strange place being brave about it. She talked for the better part of an hour, into a door, in the dark, to a man who said nothing at all. And when she finally stopped and put her hand flat on the panel and got up to go back to bed, she heard him say, from the floor, in a voice she had never heard him use in daylight, "He forgave the bills and wrote them down as paid so that you would not be ashamed of him." Clemency stood very still in the dark, with her hand still on the wood. "Yes," she said, "I think he did. Good night, Lady Wraycliff. Good night, my lord." After that, they did it again. Not every night. Not by arrangement, because an arrangement would have made it a thing that existed, and neither of them was prepared to do that yet. But 2 or 3 times a week, when the house had gone quiet, one of them would knock on the panel, and the other would answer, and the bolt stayed shut, and the talking went on till 1 or 2 in the morning. She learned that he had been a second son and had not expected any of it. She learned that he had a scar across the back of his left hand from a gate when he was a boy, and that his brother had died at sea at 23. She learned that he could recite great quantities of extremely bad poetry and was ashamed of all of it. She never once heard the name of his wife. And here is the thing about a door with a bolt in it, which Clemency came to understand somewhere in that fortnight, and which she was far too sensible to say aloud. It is a wall, yes, but a wall you talk through is not a wall anymore. It is a channel, and every night that neither of them opened it, both of them knew exactly how thin it was. In the last week of May, she walked into Harrow Cross and came back with a straw skep on the seat beside her and a bee veil in her lap and a boy from the Heart and Hollow driving the cart, because his uncle kept 12 hives at Ling Farm and had told her exactly what she would need and exactly how she would be laughed at. She was laughed at. 2 of the stable men made a very good job of not laughing where she could see them, which is worse. She did not care. She went down the kitchen garden slope in the late afternoon light when the wind had dropped, and she cleaned out the first of the 8 white boxes with her own hands and scoured it and set it square on its stand and turned it to face the morning. And then she stood in front of it and knocked on the roof of it 3 times, the way her mother's mother had done at Ling Farm. "You have not been told," she said aloud, to 8 empty hives and a great deal of sea air. "That was not done properly, and I am sorry for it. The lady of this house died 5 winters ago, in the January. Her name was Sabine. She kept you, and she is dead, and nobody came out and said it, and you were left to find out on your own, which is a hard way to hear anything. The wind came up the slope off the water. There is a new one now," said Clemency Wren, "which is me. I am not her, and I will not pretend to be, but I will keep you decently, and you will be told things in this house from now on." Then she tipped the swarm in. They took. That was the astonishing part, and Ling Farm had warned her it was 1 chance in 3. By the 2nd week of June, there was a sound on that slope that had not been heard at Wraycliff in 5 years, a low, steady note under the wind, like a held chord, and the espaliered pears against the garden wall set more fruit than they had set in a decade. She did not know he had watched. He had watched from the west landing window, from the wing with no fires in it, standing exactly where his housekeeper had once asked him to go down and tell the bees. He had watched a woman in a borrowed veil knock on a wooden box and say his wife's name out loud in the open air, and it had gone through him like a hand into cold water. He began to come to the morning room. He did it badly, at first, with an excuse each time. He needed the light. He had mislaid a paper. Once he arrived carrying a book, he then read the whole hour with visible determination and did not turn a page for 20 minutes. And Clemency, sewing on the other side of the fire, decided that mercy was a virtue and did not say so. By July, he had stopped bringing excuses. They took to reading opposite one another in the mornings. He rode out later. He came back and told her what the low fields were doing, and she told him what the accounts were doing. And once he laughed out loud at something she said about the vicar's shawl, and then looked so genuinely startled at the sound that she had to go and stand at the window for a moment. The first honey came in August, dark and slow. Mrs. Ilsley put it on the breakfast table without a word, in a plain glass dish, and stood back. The Earl of Wraycliff looked at it for a long moment. Then he took the spoon and had some, and ate a great deal more of his breakfast than he had eaten in 5 years, and said, in the end, to nobody in particular, "It is the same, exactly the same. I did not know it would be the same." "It is the same flowers," said Clemency gently. "It is only ever the flowers." He put the spoon down and went out, and she let him go. But that evening, the covers came off the furniture in the west drawing-room, on his order, and a fire was laid in there, and nobody in the household could remember being so frightened by a room being warm. The cliff path was where it nearly happened. They walked it in September, the two of them, on estate business that could perfectly well have been done in the library, and neither of them mentioned that fact. Gulls, gorse, the sea a long way down and in a temper. He had begun to walk on the seaward side of her, which he had not done in the spring, and which she noticed, and about which she said nothing, and about which she thought a very great deal. The gust came round the headland and took her sideways. It was not dangerous. She was 6 feet from the edge, and she caught herself on her own feet. But his hand came out and closed on her arm, fast, hard, all 5 fingers, entirely without permission from the man attached to it. They both stopped dead. Clemency did not move, not 1 inch, in either direction, because she understood with perfect clarity that whatever happened next was not hers to decide. She could feel his grip through her sleeve. She could feel that it was shaking. "Silas," she said. It was the first time. She had not planned it. He let go as though she had gone through his hand like a hot wire, and he stepped back, and he said, "Forgive me," in a voice that had no air in it at all. "There is nothing to forgive. There is a great deal." He was looking at the sea. "You do not know what you are asking for." "I have not asked for anything, my lord. I have never once asked. I should like you to notice that." He looked at her then, and for 1 single unguarded second she saw the whole of it, whatever it was, come up in his face like water in a well. Then he put it away. "We should go back," said the Earl of Wraycliff. He left for York the following morning and stayed 12 days, on business that his own steward did not know about, and Clemency ate dinner alone at a table 30 feet long and told herself she was not counting. She was counting. Mr. Crispin Vane arrived on a Friday with 2 horses, a valet, and a smile of exceptional quality. He was 30, and handsome in a way his cousin was not, all warmth and address and immediate first names. He kissed Clemency's hand within a minute of meeting her, which she noted, because a man who has been told nothing does not know that a hand at Wraycliff is a loaded object. "So you are the Michaelmas Countess," he said, delighted. "How very well you have done. I mean that as a compliment, you understand. I do so admire a person who takes a chance. How kind. And an apothecary's daughter. Splendid. This family has been marrying its cousins since Agincourt, and it has done us no good whatsoever." He tucked her hand into his arm and walked her the length of the terrace in full view of the house. "You must let me be your friend. You will need one. Silas is not a friend to anybody, least of all himself." He stayed a fortnight. In that fortnight he was charming to every servant, generous to every tenant, wonderful with the Bly children, and he did 4 things. He asked, twice, whether Clemency had yet been shown the West Wing. He mentioned, over dinner, in a tone of tender concern, that Silas had always been such a devoted husband to poor Sabine, and watched what happened to his cousin's hands. He rode out to the sea wall alone one afternoon, and came back, and said nothing about it to anybody. And on the 12th evening he found Clemency alone in the morning room, and stopped being charming, which was the most useful thing that happened to her that year. "May I say something unkind?" he said pleasantly. It is meant well. They usually are. He will never touch you. Crispin Vane sat down uninvited and stretched out his boots to her fire. I do not say it to wound. I say it because in about a year you will begin to think it is something you have failed to do, and it is not. It was decided long before you got here. He smiled at her, and the smile was warm, and his eyes were not in it at all. Ask him what happened to Sabine, not how she died. What happened? Ask him who was in the room, and who would not leave it, and what the physician told him to do. Then you will understand what you have married. Clemency put down her sewing. You want the trust, she said. There was a small, appreciative pause. I want a great many things, said Crispin. But since you have raised it, a marriage is a paper thing, cousin, and paper burns, or it is set aside, or it is found never to have been a marriage at all, in any sense a court cares about. 9 days, an apothecary's daughter, and separate rooms, with a bolt in the door. He stood and shot his cuffs, and was charming again as though putting on a coat. You have been very good company. Do think about the dower house. It is a pretty situation, and the roof is sound. He left on the Sunday, waving from the drive. Clemency stood at the window and watched him go, and found that her hands were perfectly steady, and that she was, for the first time since her father died, extremely angry. She asked him. She should not have asked him at dinner, 30 feet apart, with a footman at the door. But by then, she had been carrying it for 4 days, and it had got heavy. Silas, what happened to your wife? The knife and fork went down. The footman, who was 19 and had excellent instincts, removed himself. There was a fever, said the Earl. It came through the county in the January. She took it. She died. There is nothing else to tell. That is not what I asked. It is what you are getting, Crispin says. I know what Crispin says. He stood up. He was white to the mouth and absolutely level, which she had learned was the worst of all his weathers. You will not discuss my wife with my cousin. You will not discuss my wife with anyone. There is an agreement between us, madam, and you are the one who has broken the terms of it. The terms, said Clemency, and stood up too, were that you would not touch me, not that I would never ask you a question. They were the same terms. He went out. The door of the library shut, and the bolt went home in the green door at 9:30 that night, 3 hours early, and stayed shot. He did not come to the morning room for 12 days. They met once, on the 6th day, on the back stairs. She was coming down with a jar of honey for the Blythes, and he was coming up with nothing at all, and the stair was narrow, and there was a moment in which one of them had to give way. He stood aside. He put his back flat against the wall to do it, the way you do for a stranger carrying something heavy, and the whole width of that staircase was perhaps 3 feet. My lord, my lady. She went down. He went up. Neither of them looked back, and both of them knew perfectly well that the other had not. At the bottom, she found she was holding the jar so hard that the wax seal had cracked under her thumb, and she stood in the cold passage a long moment before she could go on. She was in a house with 100 rooms, and a hive singing on the slope, and a husband 4 inches away every night, and she had never in her life been so completely alone. Here is what Clemency did not know, and what the listener may as well know now, because it makes what follows very much worse. In the library on the ground floor, on those 12 nights, the Earl of Wraycliff sat with his back against the same wall her room stood over, and did not sleep. He had a letter in his coat he had written and not sent, and in it were 4 sentences he had never said aloud to any living person. He took it out most nights. He read it. He put it away. And every night at 9:30 he went upstairs and shot that bolt exactly as he had shot it on the first night, on the grounds that a man who has already killed one wife by wanting her near him has no business whatsoever wanting a second. She thought he had stopped caring. He was doing the only thing he knew how to do about how much he cared. The equinox came in with a green sky. The barometer in the hall at Wraycliff went down 4/10 in 2 days, and the herring boats came in early and stayed in. and old men on the harbour wall at the low row began telling each other what they remembered about the tide of 18 years back. Clemency wrote to the engineers at York on her own authority and in her own name. Crispin Vane's answer to his cousin came the same week, and Silas left it lying on the library table, which Clemency chose to read as an invitation. "My dear Silas," it began, "forgive me for being sensible at you. That wall has stood 90 years and will stand 90 more, and the report you set such store by was written by a man paid by the foot of timber he recommends. As to your 11 cottages, I have looked at what they return, and it is rather less than the pictures in your own dining room. If the weather genuinely alarms you, sell one. I should suggest the Dutch seascape. It has never suited that wall, and there is an irony in it I am sure you will enjoy. You have been unwell a long while, cousin, and it is making you fanciful. Do try to sleep." She read it twice. Then she put it back exactly where she had found it, squared to the edge of the table, because she wanted him to know that she had. Then she wrote to the bank and asked one very simple question about one payment made 2 summers before, and the answer came back on the Friday in a clerk's flat handwriting, and she read it twice and sat down. The £180 had been drawn. It had been drawn in cash at Harrow Cross on the 14th of July by Mr. Crispin Vane, who had signed for it. She put that letter in her writing case and locked it, and she did not take it to her husband, because her husband had not spoken more than a dozen words to her in a fortnight, and there was a limit to what a woman can carry up a hill on her own. Then, on the Tuesday, the wind went round to the east. She went down to the hives at dusk because she could not bear the house. The sky was the colour of a bruise, and the sound off the sea had changed, gone from a rush to a long low knocking, and the bees knew it. They were coming in heavy and fast, and going straight down into the dark of the box. Clemency knelt on the grass in front of the first hive and knocked 3 times on the roof of it. "I am going to tell you something," she said, "because I told you that you would be told things in this house, and I am not going to be a liar to a beehive on top of everything else." The wind moved in the pears. "He will not have me," she said. "That is the whole of it. He has been kind, and he has been cruel, and now he is neither, and I am to live in this beautiful cold house and be his roof. And the worst of it is that I do not want to leave, because I am not lonely here. I am lonely at him, which is a great deal worse and takes up considerably more room." She sat back on her heels. "I have been overlooked all my life, and I never once minded until I was overlooked by a man I would have gone into the sea for. That is new. I should like it noted that that is new." She was quiet a moment. "Her name was Sabine," she said, "and I do not hate her. I want to say that out loud once, where somebody can hear it. She kept you very well, and she is not the difficulty. She is not the difficulty at all." "No," said the Earl of Wraycliff, behind her. "She is not." Clemency got up off her knees very slowly and turned round, and did not bother to arrange her face, because there was no point and no time. He was standing 6 feet away on the kitchen garden path, in the wing of the house he had not walked past in 5 winters, with the wind coming up the slope and taking his coat. "How long have you been there?" "Since he will not have me," said Silas. "Then you have heard a great deal that was not intended for you." "I have heard a great deal that was not intended for anyone." He looked at the hive, and then at her, and then he said the thing that she would think about every day for the rest of her life. "Lady Wraycliff, you have not been overlooked in this house." "Have I not?" "No." His voice was not steady. He did not try to make it steady, which she understood, later, was the bravest thing he had ever done in front of another person. "I have not once looked at you across that table, not in 7 months. And I could tell you the colour of every ribbon you have worn since Michaelmas, and which of the 11 cottages you have been into this week, and that you read with your left hand under your chin, and that when you are angry you become extremely polite a good minute before anybody else notices anything at all." He stopped, started again. "You have not been overlooked. You have been the only thing I look at, and I have taken very great care that you should never catch me at it." The wind came up the slope. The hive sang under her hand, Why? Said Clemency, and he told her, because the fever did not come through the county to this house, said Silas Vane. It came here in me. She did not move. I had been in London 3 weeks. I came home on the 9th of January, and I was ill on the stairs before my coat was off. She put me in the west room, because of the light, because she thought I should want the light. He was looking at the hives now, at all 8 of them, in a row in the dark. The physician came from Harrow Cross and told her to keep out of that room. He told her plainly. Tenue. He told her it went from the sick to the well, and she was to nurse me at second hand or not at all, and there were 4 servants in this house willing to do it. Silas. She sat with me 10 days, he said. I have no memory of any of it, not 1 hour. They tell me I was quite lucid at the end of it, and I asked for water, and I ate a little bread, and on the 11th day, I got up. He turned and looked at her. And on the 11th day, she went to bed with a headache, and she was dead on the 22nd of January. And I stood at that window up there, and I could not go down and tell 8 beehives her name, because to say it out loud was to say, I brought it in the door. The sea knocked at the bottom of the cliff, so there is your answer, and it is not a romance, he said. I did not swear I would never touch you out of loyalty to a dead woman. I swore it because the last person who was kind enough to come close to me in this house is in the churchyard, and because I have discovered, madam, over these 7 months, that I would rather be cold to you for 40 years than take the smallest possible chance of doing it again. A breath. That is all. That is the entire reason. You may do as you like with it. Clemency Wren stood in the wind between 8 beehives and looked at her husband. May I say something? She said. Yes. You have kept this house exactly the way a man keeps a grave. Tidy, cold, visited. She took 1 step towards him, and only 1, and stopped where he could bear it. And I have listened to you tell me for 7 months that you are dangerous, when what you have actually been telling me is that you are frightened. Those are not the same, Silas. One of them is a fact about the world. The other is a fact about you, and facts about people can change. He did not answer, but he did not go the long way round by the stable yard. He walked back up through the kitchen garden with her, past all 8 hives, in the dark, with the wind rising off the water, and their sleeves did not touch, and it was the closest thing to a wedding either of them had yet had. She heard him come up at 11. She was in her chair by the fire with her book upside down in her lap, and she heard the boards, and his door, and then the small familiar shift of a man standing on the other side of 4 inches of green paint. Then nothing. No bolt. She sat absolutely still and listened to a silence with a shape in it, and she understood exactly what was being offered and exactly what it had cost, and she understood something else too. That a man who has spent 5 winters shutting a door does not stop shutting it as a kindness. He stops because he has run out of reasons, and a man who has run out of reasons in the middle of the night is not the same man he will be at 8 in the morning. Clemency Wren got up and crossed the room and put her hand flat on the green panel. Silas, she said, I know. Yes, not tonight. On the other side of the door, she heard him let out a breath that sounded as though it had been in him since January of a year 5 winters gone. No, he said, not tonight. But not because of Sabine, said Clemency, with her palm on the wood and her forehead very nearly against it. I will not have it be because of Sabine. If it is never, then let it be because you have decided something, not because you are still waiting to see whether I die of you. There was a very long pause. Good night, Clemency, said the Earl of Wraycliff, her name, in his own voice, through a door he had not bolted. Good night, my love, said Clemency, quite clearly, and went to bed, and lay in the dark with her heart going like a bird in a hedge, listening to the wind come round to the east and get its shoulder under the house. 3 days later, the sea came over the wall. The barometer began to go down on the Wednesday and did not stop. Clemency stood in the hall and watched it the way you watch a person you do not trust. And then she went and found the tide table, and then she went and found her husband, and this time she did not knock. The spring tide is Saturday night. The wind is east and hardening. Silas, that hatch will not lift. I know it. Then write to Crispin today. It was his work. He can pay for its undoing. I have written to Crispin 4 times. The Earl said it without heat and put down his pen, and for the first time in their acquaintance, he looked at her with nothing between them at all. You read his answer. I left it where you would. Then we do it ourselves. With what men? In 3 days, in this weather, with Ned Bly, and the 4 he can raise from the low row, and the 2 from the stables who dislike me, and you, said Clemency, and with a crowbar, and a saw, and a great deal of bad temper. They worked Thursday and Friday. They got the outer facing off, and found what she had known they would find, which was that the timbers behind it had gone the way the report said, and that the hatch would rise perhaps 1/3 of its travel before it jammed on its own rot. 1/3 would not be enough, not against a spring tide with the sea behind it. On Friday night, the Earl of Wraycliff sent Ned Bly on the fast horse to Harrow Cross with money and a written order for chain and tackle, and stood on the sea wall in the dark with his wife beside him, and said, "If it comes in over the top before the tide turns, get them up to the house, all of them. Do not wait for me, and do not argue with anybody." "I never argue," said Clemency. "You are the most argumentative woman in the north of England." "Yes," she said. "Isn't it a relief?" He laughed. Out loud, on a sea wall, in an east wind, 3 hours before the worst night of both their lives. It began at 9 on the Saturday, and it did not build. That is what everyone said afterwards, in the barn, with blankets round them. It did not build. It simply arrived. All of it, the way a door comes open in a gale. By 9:30, the beck had backed up against the shut hatch and was standing over the lane. By 10, the first of the low cottages had 6 inches through the front door, and Mrs. Bly was carrying furniture up her own stairs in the dark. Clemency was in the 3rd cottage from the end, with her skirts tied up and her father's old satchel across her body, when Ned came through the water, shouting that his lordship had gone down to the wall with the tackle and 2 men, and that the chain had parted. She did not stop to think about it. She has said since that she is not proud of that, and everyone who was there has told her she is a fool. She went out into it. The lane was thigh-deep and running. She got up onto the wall by the far steps, where the stone was, and she went along the top of it in a wind that put her on her hands twice, and she found them at the hatch, 3 men, 1 lantern, a broken chain, and the sea coming over the parapet in white sheets every 15 seconds. "Get back up the hill!" Silas roared at her. "The winch on the west side," she shouted back. "The old one. It is on the plan." He stopped dead in 6 inches of running water. "What? There is a 2nd winch. It was put in 1810, and it was never taken out. It is under the stone housing by the steps. I have seen the drawing. I have seen it. Silas, it is there." They tore the housing off with a crowbar, and the winch was there, seized solid with 60 years of salt, and the 4 of them got it moving with a bar and a great deal of language, and the hatch went up its jammed 3rd and stopped, and Clemency Wren, Countess of Wraycliff, put her arm, and then her shoulder, and then most of the rest of her down into the black water of the channel with the lantern held over her by a 19-year-old stable lad, feeling along the rotten sill for the thing that was fouling it. It was a beam, part of the old facing, dropped in and wedged crossways when the sea came over. She got 2 hands on it. She got it half out, and it turned, and the pressure behind it took it, and the water went through in one go, and the beam went with the water, and so did she. She heard, quite clearly, over everything, a man scream her name. The channel took her 60 feet and put her into the stonework at the foot of the steps, and she got an arm through the iron ring where the boats used to tie, and she held on to it in the dark with the whole North Sea trying to take her out through the gate she had just opened. She held on for 4 minutes. She was still holding on when a hand closed round her wrist. He came into the water after her. He came in without his coat and without the lantern and without 1 second of hesitation, a man who had not laid a finger on her since the day he married her. And he got his hand round her wrist and his arm round her body, and he took her out of that channel with the strength of somebody who has stopped being able to imagine an alternative. They came up onto the wall together. She could not stand. He picked her up. That is the sentence. He picked her up in front of Ned Bly and 2 tenants and every soul in the low row who had come out to watch the water go, and he carried her 1/4 of a mile up the hill to the great house with her head under his chin and her hands fisted in his shirt, and he did not put her down once. The lane was full of people. She was aware of that, distantly, through the cold, which had got into her by then and was doing the thing cold does, making everything slow and reasonable and rather far away. She was aware of Mrs. Ilsley's voice. She was aware of the hall and the stairs and the fire in the morning room and of being set down in front of it. And she was aware, absolutely and forever, of her husband's hands. He chafed her wrists. He got the wet shawl off her, and Mrs. Ilsley got the rest, and he was there again, the moment there was anything decent to hold, kneeling on the hearthrug with her hands between both of his, rubbing the blood back into her fingers one at a time, and he was talking, low and steady and without any punctuation at all, and this is what he was saying. Stay awake. Look at me. Clemency, look at me. That is it. That is right. Do not shut your eyes. I am not asking you. I am telling you. His thumb went over and over her knuckles. You appalling, unbearable woman, you went into the water. You went into the water with a lantern and a drawing from 1810, and you opened a gate that 4 grown men could not open, and if you die on this floor, I will not forgive you. Do you hear me? Not ever. Not in 40 years. You are touching me, said Clemency, from a long way off. His hands did not stop. Yes, said Silas Vane. You swore. I know what I swore. His voice cracked straight across the middle. I have thought about it for 4 minutes in the water, and I find I do not care. Let it come. Let whatever it is come and find me. I have had 5 winters of keeping myself perfectly safe, and it has been a grave with a fire in it, and I would rather have 1 night of this with your hands warm than another year of standing on a landing looking at 8 beehives. He put his forehead down against her fingers. Stay awake, my love. Stay awake and be angry with me tomorrow. Be as angry as you like. Nobody in that house ever spoke of what they heard on the other side of the morning room door that night. But Mrs. Ilsley kept the fire in all night, and she cried on the back stairs at 4 in the morning, and she has never once admitted it. Clemency woke at noon the next day, in her own bed, with her hair still damp, and the whole of the low row saved, every soul, not one lost, not one house down. He was asleep in the chair beside her with his head at an angle that would ruin him for a week, and her hand was in his, and he had not let go even in his sleep. She lay there and looked at the ceiling and felt something she had not felt since she was 19 years old, which was the sensation of a future. He woke. He saw that she was awake, and for 1 whole hour that morning, Clemency Wren had everything she had ever privately wanted and had never once asked for. He put his hand against her face. He said her name 4 times, for no reason at all. He told her, in a voice still rough from the water, that he had known on the cliff path in September, and had known properly at the beehives, and had known unbearably at about the 4th minute of that channel. He sat on the edge of the bed like a man who had come home from somewhere, and he laughed at her when she tried to get up, and he brought her the honey himself. When you are well, he said, there is a good deal I should like to say to you. Say it now. No. When you are well, and standing up, and can knock me down for it if you choose. He kissed her fingers. Just her fingers. I have been a coward for 5 winters, Clemency. I intend to stop. Give me until the end of the week. That is the last entirely happy hour in this story for some time, and the listener should have it in full, because it was real. Every bit of it was real. That matters later, because on the Monday, Dr. Fenwick came up from Harrow Cross to look at her chest and pronounced her sound as a bell and stayed to dinner. And over the port, quite innocently, meaning nothing by it, he said, "You will have been thinking of the last time, my lord. I have thought of little else since the news came. God be thanked it went otherwise. And Clemency, at the far end of the table, watched 5 winters come back into her husband's face like a tide coming over a wall. He was gone from the morning room by Wednesday. By Thursday, the bolt was shot at 9. By Friday, there was a letter on the hall table addressed to a firm of solicitors in York and Mrs. Ilsley, who had been ordered to have the Dower House aired and did not think much of it, put it into Clemency's hands with her jaw set like a door. Clemency found him in the library. "The Dower House," she said. "It is a good house. Sound roof, southern aspect, 4 miles. You would have your own establishment, your own income, your own people." He was standing with his back to her, at the window, and he had the tone he had used the very first day about the trust. A fact, offered early, so nobody need be disappointed later. "Your brother may come to you in the holidays. You may keep bees at it, if you like. I have already written to have the hives moved." "You have written to have the hives moved?" "Yes, and this is because you love me," said Clemency. His shoulders went rigid. "This is because you love me," she said again, "and I want you to say that part out loud, Silas, because I will not stand here and let you dress it up as generosity. You have not tired of me. You have not found me wanting. You held my hands on that hearthrug, and you called me your love in front of God and Mrs. Ilsley, and it frightened you so badly that you have spent 4 days building me a very pretty box 4 miles away. You nearly died," he said, to the window. "In the sea," she heard her own voice go up and let it. "In the sea, Silas, in an east wind, opening a hatch your cousin stole the money for. Not of a fever, not of you. You cannot even take the credit for it, and it is killing you that you cannot. Because if the water can have me, then you are not the only dangerous thing in England, and then you have been sitting in the dark for 5 winters for nothing at all." He turned round then, and he was grey. "Do not," he said quietly, "tell me it was for nothing." And Clemency Wren, who loved him, and who had been raised by a man who forgave bills and wrote them down as paid, looked at her husband and did the hardest thing she had ever done, which was not to be kind to him. "I am going to say this once," she said, "and then I am going to go and pack, and you may decide what sort of man you are while I am upstairs. I have been overlooked all my life. You know that. I told a beehive about it, and you had the bad manners to be listening. And I want you to understand that I was never once ruined by it. I kept my father's books, and I set bones, and I read Dutch, and I was perfectly good company to myself for 29 years. And if I go to the Dower House on Monday, I shall keep bees at it, and I shall be perfectly good company to myself for another 40. So this is not a woman begging. Look at me and be clear about that. This is a woman telling you the terms. I will be your wife. I will be your friend, your steward, your countess, your nurse, and the person who tells you when you are being a fool, and I will do all of it gladly for the rest of my life. But I will not be your penance. I will not live at the end of a table, in a cold house, being the thing you are proud of, not touching. I will not be 4 miles off with the hives, being managed, being survived. Her voice did not shake. She had not permitted it. You may have all of me or you may have none of me, Silas, and I am so sorry, but you may not have the arrangement. Not any more. I have been in this house 8 months, and it turns out I am worth more than the arrangement. He said, "Clemency, no. You said give me until the end of the week." She was at the door. "It is Friday. I shall be in my room." She packed. She did it properly, the way she did everything, and she cried exactly twice, and both times briefly. And at 4 o'clock, she put on her cloak and went down the hill to the low row to say goodbye to 31 people who were alive because she had gone into the water. That is where Crispin Vane found her, in the tithe barn, in front of every tenant on the Wraycliff land. He had been in the county 3 days, and he had chosen his moment beautifully. The barn was full because the low row was still drying out, and half of them were living in it, on straw, with the estate's blankets and the estate's soup and a stove at either end. There were perhaps 60 people there when Crispin Vane walked in out of the rain with a stranger behind him. "Cousin," he said warmly, and in her cloak, "Oh dear, Mr. Vane. Do not let me interrupt. You were saying goodbye, I think." He shook out his hat. The barn had gone very quiet, in the way 60 people go quiet when they can smell a thing coming. "It is as well I came. There has been the most extraordinary talk in Harrow Cross, and it seemed to me only fair that you should hear it from a friend." "Say it then." "You are not the Countess of Wraycliff," said Crispin Vane pleasantly, "and you never have been. 9 days' acquaintance, an apothecary's daughter with £300 of her father's debts, a settlement that expired at Michaelmas, and a marriage that met the terms of it by 4 days. And separate rooms, good people, for 8 months, with a bolt on the door, which every servant in that house will swear to on the book." He turned, easily, taking the room with him. "It is not a marriage, it is a device, and a device may be set aside, and when it is set aside, the trust comes to me, and I shall be as sorry about it as anybody." Somebody at the back said, "She went in the water for us." "She did," Crispin agreed, "and it was very fine, and it will make no difference at all to a court, nor should it. My cousin is not a well man, and he has been taken advantage of, and I am afraid I must say so." And then Silas came in. He came in at the far door with the rain on him, having ridden down the hill because Mrs. Ilsley had sent Ned Bly up it at a gallop, and he stopped when he saw the crowd and his wife in her travelling cloak in the middle of it. Crispin's face did something wonderful, pure pleasure, gone in half a second. "Silas, good, you should hear this too." He took 2 steps and raised his voice for the barn. "I have brought Dr. Fenwick's predecessor from Harrow Cross, who attended the late Countess in the January 5 winters back, and who has been very reluctant, and whom I have persuaded, because the truth serves everybody in the end." He gestured. The stranger stood in the doorway looking as though he wished he were dead. "Tell them what you told me, sir. Tell them who was in that sick room. Tell them who was ordered out of it, and who would not go, and why she would not go." "Crispin," said Silas. "Tell them," said Crispin Vane, who asked her to stay. The barn did not make a sound, and the Earl of Wraycliff stood in front of 60 of his own tenants, in the wet, and looked at his wife across the whole length of that building, and Clemency saw the moment he understood that there was nowhere left to put it. "He does not need to tell them," said Silas. "I will." "The doctor ordered her out of the room on the 2nd day," he said. His voice carried. It was not loud. It was simply the only thing in that barn. "He told her the fever went from the sick to the well. He told her 4 servants were willing. He told her I would very likely live, and that she would very likely not, if she stayed. She stood in the door with her hand on it, and she asked me what I wanted." He stopped, started again. It cost him what it cost him, and I was out of my head with it, and I did not know what I was saying. But I have known every day since exactly what I said, because 2 people in that room heard me, and one of them is standing in that doorway now. I said, "Don't go. Stay where I can see you." And she stayed. She stayed 10 days, and she is in the churchyard, and I got up on the 11th morning and ate a piece of bread. He looked at nobody. That is what happened to my wife. My cousin has been kind enough to bring it 11 miles in the rain, so you may all have it. He is quite right that I am not a well man. I have not been well since the 22nd of January, 5 winters ago, and I have run this estate from behind a door, and every one of you has been the poorer for it, and I am sorry. The rain came down on 60 feet of barn roof. Then Clemency Wren walked out into the middle of that floor, in her travelling cloak, with her hood down. "May I answer him?" she said. "Not Mr. Vane, you." Silas said, "Yes." "Then hear it in front of all of them, because you will not believe it if I say it in a library. You have carried that sentence for 5 winters as though it were a weapon you fired. It was not. It was a frightened man asking his wife not to leave the room, which is the most ordinary thing a human creature has ever said. And there is not a soul in this barn who has not said it in one form or another to somebody they loved. She was not a child, Silas. She was a grown woman with a physician's plain warning in her ears and her hand on the door, and she heard what you asked, and she chose. She chose to stay. That was hers. It was the last thing she ever chose, and it was the bravest, and you have spent 5 years taking it off her and calling it your crime. Her voice rang off the stone. That is a thief's way of loving somebody. It takes back the last thing she ever gave. You did not kill her. You were not the fever. You were the man she would not leave, and if you want to honor her, then for God's sake stop punishing the world for her courage. Nobody moved. As to the rest of it, said Clemency, and turned and took a folded paper out of her sleeve. Mr. Vane, you say I am a device, and the trust should come to you. Then let us have the trust properly examined, and let us begin with £180, voted for the renewal of the Wraycliff Seagate, paid 2 summers ago on your requisition. She held it up. This is from the bank at Harrow Cross, in a clerk's hand, and it says the money was drawn in cash on the 14th of July, over the counter, by Mr. Crispin Vane, who signed for it and put his address as this house. The gate was never made. The timbers stayed as they were. And on Saturday night, the sea came over that wall onto 11 cottages, with 31 people in them, and every one of you knows what was between you and the water. She turned to the barn. It was a 60-year-old winch, 4 men, a crowbar, and no gate at all, because he took the money. The barn came off the ground. Crispin Vane got as far as the word slander, and Ned Bly, who was 19, stood up off the straw with his hat in his hands and said, "You let my mother's house go under, sir, for £180. And after that, Crispin did not really get to say anything else at all. And he left, and he did not wave from the drive. Silas crossed the barn floor. He crossed it slowly, in front of every tenant on that land, past the stove and the straw, and Mrs. Bly, and her 4-year-old daughter, who was alive because of croup and steam, and a woman in a nightgown, and he stopped in front of his wife. 8 months ago, he said, in my study, I told you I would marry you and never touch you. You did not flinch. I have thought about that a great deal. I remember. You said you had been overlooked by experts, and that I would find I was not the most thorough. His mouth did the thing where a smile would have gone, and this time the smile arrived. You were wrong, Clemency. I was the most thorough man in England, and it took me 8 months and a Seagate to work out that I was not protecting you from anything at all. I was hiding from you. You are the first thing in 5 winters I have wanted enough to be frightened of. He held out his hand, palm up, in front of 60 people. I swore I would never touch you, said the Earl of Wraycliff. I should like, in front of every one of you, to break my word. Clemency Wren looked at that hand for exactly as long as she wanted to, which she felt she had earned. Then she put hers into it. And the tithe barn at Wraycliff, full of wet straw and stove smoke and 31 people who should have drowned, made a noise that they heard up at the great house. He did not kiss her there. He was a private man to the end of his life. He simply held on to her hand in front of all of them and walked her out into the rain and did not let go on the whole long way up the hill. They took the bolt off the green door in November. He did it himself, with a screwdriver, badly, and made a great deal more mess of the paintwork than a competent man would have, and when it was out he stood there weighing 4 inches of blackened iron in his palm like something he had brought up from the sea. Put it in the drawer, said Clemency, from the bed. Burn it. Certainly not. Put it in the drawer where I can look at it when you irritate me. It is in that drawer now. The gate was built in the spring, in oak and iron, by an engineer from York, and paid for out of the sale of a Dutch seascape that Silas said he had never liked, and Clemency later discovered he had liked enormously. It had been Crispin's own suggestion, which she has always considered the most satisfying thing about it. The low row got new sills and new floors. The school got a second room. Dr. Fenwick got a house at the bottom of the hill instead of 11 miles off behind a flood, which Clemency regarded as the finest thing she ever did with anybody's money, and in the July she took a fever. It came through the county the way they do, and she got it from a child in the 3rd cottage, and for 2 days she was as ill as she had ever been in her life. This is the part that matters. Listen carefully, because this is the whole of it. Dr. Fenwick came and looked at her and turned to the Earl and said, "My lord, you should not be in this room." And Mrs. Ilsley, standing in the door with the keys in both hands, said afterwards that she watched 5 winters go across that man's face like cloud shadow over a hillside. All of it. Everything. The whole grave with the fire in it. "Thank you," said Silas Vane. "I shall be in this room." He did not leave it. Not for 4 days. He sat where his wife could see him, and he put his hands on her when she was cold, and he read her extremely bad poetry in the small hours, and was not ashamed of it. And on the 3rd night, when the fever was at its worst and she did not know him, he went out at 2 in the morning in his shirt sleeves and walked down the kitchen garden slope to the hives. He knocked 3 times on the roof of the first one. "You will have been told about me," he said, "to 8 beehives and a great deal of sea air. I am the one who would not come down. I am sorry for it. It was not a slight, and I should have said so 5 winters ago, and I have got a great deal wrong." The hive hummed under the wood. "Her name is Clemency," said the Earl of Wraycliff, "and she is very ill upstairs. And I am telling you because she said things would be told in this house from now on, and I find I cannot bear to be a liar to a beehive either. She turned on the 4th day. Of course she did. This is that sort of story, and you were promised a happy one, and I would not do that to you at this hour of the night." They went into the assembly at Harrow Cross that autumn, because the tenants had asked it and because Clemency had a new gown, the colour of pale green sea glass, and had every intention of being seen in it. The Hart and Hollow was lit up the whole length of the street. The rooms were full, and when the Earl and Countess of Wraycliff were announced at the top of the stair, 60 people turned round. Clemency stood at the top of that staircase and understood, with a kind of quiet astonishment, that they had turned for her. Not for the title. Not for the man beside her. For the woman who had gone into the water at the sea gate, whose name they now all knew, in a county that had spent 29 years finishing with her before she had finished speaking. And in the crowd she saw the very good bonnet, and next to it the slightly better one, both of them looking straight at her. She smiled at them. She was not a bitter woman. She had honey and a school and a husband whose hand was on the small of her back, and she could afford to be generous, and she smiled at them with the whole warm, expensive length of it. Her brother Gideon came for Christmas, 6 feet tall and ducking through every door in the house, and ate his way through most of a season's honey, and asked his sister on the 2nd evening why the west rooms had fires in them if nobody slept there. "Because we like them warm," said Clemency. "Every room in that house has a fire in it now. It costs a fortune. Neither of them has ever once suggested otherwise." And late that night, on the landing, Gideon Wren asked his brother-in-law how a man goes about proposing to a woman, in general, hypothetically, no particular reason. The Earl of Wraycliff thought about it for a moment. "Badly," he said, "and then you spend some years making it right. That is all any of us do." He put a hand on the boy's shoulder as he passed, easily, without thinking about it at all, the way a man does who has stopped counting the inches. "Whatever you swear to her at the start, remember you may be wrong. I was. It is the best thing that ever happened to me." That is the story of Clemency Wren, who was overlooked by experts, and married a man who swore he would never touch her, and opened a sea gate in the dark because 31 people were sleeping below the wall. He broke that vow, in the end, in front of everybody, and put his hand out palm up and asked her to let him. She had waited a long time to be asked for anything. Sleep well tonight. Somebody in your life has been counting you all along without ever letting you catch them at it, and the ones who never looked up were only ever telling you about themselves. There is another story on the shelf whenever you would like it. If you are still with me at this hour, tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. I do like to know how far these stories travel. And stay a moment at the end, because there is another one waiting, and it begins in a house where every clock is right and nobody has been on time in years.